The morning of January 15, 2009 started like any other winter day in New York City. The temperature hovered around 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and a crisp wind swept across LaGuardia Airport as passengers boarded U.S. Airways Flight 1549. Among them were business travelers heading home to Charlotte, families returning from vacations, and regular commuters who had made this trip countless times before. None of them could have imagined that in just 6 minutes, they would become part of one of the most extraordinary survival stories in aviation history. Captain Chesley Sully Sullenberger, a 57-year-old veteran pilot with over 40 years of flying experience, completed his pre-flight checklist alongside First Officer Jeffrey Skiles. Sully wasn't just any pilot. He was a former fighter pilot, a glider enthusiast, and a safety expert who had spent decades studying aircraft systems and emergency procedures. His calm demeanor and methodical approach had earned him respect throughout the aviation industry, but nothing in his extensive training could have fully prepared him for what was about to unfold. Flight 1549 was scheduled to be a routine 2-hour flight from New York's LaGuardia Airport to Charlotte Douglas International Airport in North Carolina. The Airbus A320 carried 150 passengers and 5 crew members. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate at 3:03 p.m., everything appeared normal. The passengers settled in, flight attendants completed their safety demonstrations, and the pilots received clearance for takeoff. At 3:25 p.m., Flight 1549 began its takeoff roll down LaGuardia's runway 4. The engines roared to life, and within seconds, the aircraft lifted off into the cold January sky. Captain Sullenberger was at the controls, while First Officer Skiles handled radio communications. As they climbed through the crystal-clear afternoon air, Manhattan's skyline stretched out below them, and passengers gazed out at the familiar sight of the city shrinking beneath their wings. But at 3:27 p.m., just 2 minutes and 30 seconds after takeoff, everything changed in an instant. At an altitude of approximately 2,800 feet, the aircraft suddenly encountered a large flock of Canada geese. The impact was immediate and devastating. Several birds struck the aircraft's nose, windscreen, and most critically, both engines. The sound was unlike anything most passengers had ever heard, a series of loud thuds followed by an ominous grinding noise as debris from the bird strikes damaged the engine fans. In the cockpit, warning lights immediately began flashing, and alarm bells started ringing. Both engines had lost power almost simultaneously, leaving the aircraft in an unprecedented situation. Captain Sullenberger felt the plane shudder and heard the engines wind down to an eerie silence. In aviation, losing one engine is a serious emergency that pilots train for extensively. Losing both engines shortly after takeoff is almost unthinkable, and it had never happened to a commercial airliner over a major metropolitan area. "We've lost thrust in both engines," Sullenberger calmly announced over the intercom, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "We're returning to LaGuardia." But even as he spoke those words, he was quickly calculating in his mind whether returning to LaGuardia was actually possible. The aircraft was rapidly losing altitude, and they were flying over one of the most densely populated areas in the United States. First Officer Skiles immediately contacted air traffic control. "Hit birds. We've lost thrust in both engines. We're turning back towards LaGuardia." Air traffic controller Patrick Harton, who had been having a routine day, suddenly found himself managing what could become one of the worst aviation disasters in New York's history. "Okay, yeah, you need to return to LaGuardia. Turn left heading of, 220, Harton responded, his voice betraying the first hints of concern. But Captain Sullenberger was already running calculations in his head that would determine the fate of everyone aboard. The aircraft was descending at approximately 1,000 feet per minute. They were at 2,800 feet when the bird strike occurred, and LaGuardia was several miles behind them. Using his decades of experience and his knowledge of glider flying, Sullenberger quickly determined that they didn't have enough altitude or forward speed to make it back to LaGuardia. "We can't do it," he told air traffic control. "We're gonna be in the Hudson." Those words sent chills through everyone who heard them. Air traffic controller Harton immediately began coordinating with emergency services, but he couldn't hide his disbelief. "I'm sorry, say again, Cactus?" "We're gonna be in the Hudson," Sullenberger repeated, using the call sign for U.S. Airways flights. As the reality of the situation set in, the three flight attendants, Donna Dent, Doreen Welsh, and Sheila Dale, sprang into action. They had trained for emergency situations, but a water landing was one of the most challenging scenarios possible. "Brace for impact," they shouted throughout the cabin, demonstrating the proper brace position as passengers quickly followed their instructions. In the cockpit, Captain Sullenberger was executing what would later be called a perfect deadstick landing. With no engine power, he had to use the aircraft's momentum and the principles of gliding to control their descent. Every decision had to be precise. Too steep an approach and they would hit the water too hard, potentially breaking apart the aircraft. Too shallow, and they might not reach the river at all, instead crashing into the densely populated areas of Manhattan or New Jersey. Meanwhile, First Officer Skiles was frantically working through the emergency checklist, trying to restart the engines. "Emergency engine restart," he called out, his fingers flying over switches and controls. But the damage from the bird strikes was too severe. Both engines remained lifeless as the aircraft continued its glide toward the Hudson River. As Flight 1549 descended toward the river, passengers could see the water rushing up to meet them. Some prayed, others called loved ones, and many simply held hands with strangers, united in their shared peril. The flight attendants continued shouting commands, "Heads down, stay down. Brace, brace, brace." At exactly 3:31 p.m., just 4 minutes after the bird strike, Captain Sullenberger executed what aviation experts would later call one of the most skillful emergency landings in commercial aviation history. The aircraft touched down on the Hudson River's surface at approximately 150 miles per hour, but Sullenberger managed to keep the nose slightly up and the wings level. The impact was jarring, but the aircraft remained intact. Water immediately began rushing into the cabin through small openings and cracks created by the impact. The aircraft was floating, but everyone knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. In the frigid January waters of the Hudson River, time was now the enemy. The flight attendants opened the aircraft doors, and passengers began evacuating onto the wings and into the rapidly deploying life rafts. What happened next demonstrated the best of human nature under extreme pressure. Passengers helped each other, with stronger individuals assisting children, elderly passengers, and those who couldn't swim. Despite the freezing conditions and the terrifying circumstances, there was no panic, no pushing, no selfish behavior. People formed human chains to help others exit the aircraft safely. Captain Sullenberger and First Officer Skiles remained at their posts, ensuring all passengers had evacuated before leaving the aircraft themselves. Sullenberger walked through the cabin twice, checking every seat to make sure no one had been left behind. Only after confirming that the aircraft was empty did he finally step onto the wing and into a rescue boat. The response from New York's emergency services was swift and heroic. Ferry boats, tugboats, Coast Guard vessels, police boats, and fire department units converged on the scene within minutes. The crew of the ferry Thomas Jefferson was among the first to reach the aircraft, pulling passengers from the icy water and providing them with blankets and medical attention. 155 people had been aboard Flight 1549, and miraculously, all 155 survived. While some passengers suffered injuries, mostly minor cuts, bruises, and hypothermia, not a single life was lost. In an age where aviation disasters typically result in significant casualties, the successful water landing and evacuation of Flight 1549 seemed almost impossible. The investigation that followed revealed the extraordinary chain of events and decisions that made this miracle possible. The National Transportation Safety Board determined that Captain Sullenberger's decision to land in the Hudson River was correct and that his execution of the emergency landing was nearly flawless. The bird strike had indeed disabled both engines beyond any possibility of restart, and computer simulations later confirmed that the aircraft could not have reached any airport. But the miracle wasn't just about one pilot's skill. It was about teamwork, training, and the dedication of countless professionals. The flight attendants' quick thinking and leadership kept passengers calm and organized during the evacuation. Air traffic controller Patrick Harton's immediate response helped coordinate the emergency services. The ferry crews, Coast Guard, and other first responders risked their own lives in the freezing river to save others. Captain Sullenberger, who became known worldwide simply as Sully, was hailed as a hero, but he consistently deflected praise to his crew and the first responders. "We all did our jobs," he said in interviews following the incident. His humility in the face of extraordinary circumstances only added to the public's admiration. The miracle on the Hudson, as it came to be known, reminded the world that even in our modern age of technology and complexity, human skill, courage, and compassion still matter most in moments of crisis. It showed that when trained professionals work together and ordinary people support each other, extraordinary outcomes are possible. Today, the aircraft that became Flight 1549 is on display at the Carolinas Aviation Museum in Charlotte, North Carolina, serving as a testament to the skill of its crew and the resilience of the human spirit. The story continues to inspire people around the world, proving that sometimes, against all odds, miracles really do happen.